Fecal transplants. This happens to be a uniquely and yet sometimes gross topic. So fecal transplants are when you you have some particular issue going on in the lower bowels in particular. And there's been a lot of research behind fecal transplants, and there's many areas in which they're successful. So let's look at a few of those, because fecal transplants are a very unique approach to the microbiome in particular. Excuse me. So when we think of fecal transplants, we take a stool sample and we then use, of course, a colonic wash essentially to replace the microorganisms that are living within our lower intestine or our colon. It's a technique that you want to get it all the way up. Your colon's relatively long. It's, almost a meter long in some people. And so you want to get that all the way up to replace or at least change the microbial context and content, the community, with a healthier microbiome. And what leads us to the concept of having to do one? Well, the one area that's been absolutely successful with fecal transplants is a condition that is caused by C. difficile, Clostridium difficile, and certainly the antibiotic resistant versions. Highly successful. It's been regulated. It's been approved. This is an area where fecal transplants have been highly successful. They've been less successful in areas of Crohn's or SIBO or IBS. It doesn't mean that they can't in the future become more successful, but it hasn't been the case. But there are other areas in which it has a lot of potential. Metabolic disorders, particular dysbiosis, there's been some success. But what we need to be very careful about is the source of microbial fecal transplants, because in order to take someone else's feces and then use what we think is healthy and use that to transform or recolonize someone's colon to benefit them, the source is critical, because there's a lot of organisms that can live in someone else's colon that may or may not be beneficial to your own or that person's. And there's a number of cases where, for example, in both the UK and in the United States, where the origin of the fecal transplant came from someone that was already had obesity. And we know that the microbiome is linked to obesity. And by taking what was otherwise a healthy microbial fecal transplant, the patient then developed obesity, it certainly did develop obesity, and then they were solving one problem and then introduced a new problem. And that's something that could always happen. So a lot of consideration, a lot of clinical input. You certainly must do this through a clinical advisor or a clinician, please, because there are risks as there are rewards. And it's a very complex ecosystem. And of course, you'd want to do a bunch of research before even undergoing that. But they've been around a long time. And of course, they led, like our research group, into the idea of how to improve a microbiome outside of fecal transplants. They will have their place. They're going to clinically have their place. But our approach from a research and from a clinical standpoint is to provide the necessary approach to a healthier microbiome through different routes. And that includes things like keystone probiotics, really important prebiotics, where we want to alter the composition, alter the benefit and the function of our microbiome using these tools outside of what we'd call fecal transplant. And that's really the approach we want to do. So how do we do that? And when is a fecal transplant important? You do your research. There are some clinical uses like C. difficile infection, but certainly go through a clinician before you even attempt to undergo this process. There's even been stories of people trying to use, young people's fecal content into an elderly population. And again, the research is not clear. And oftentimes, if you go young enough, the microbiome is not even the same. There's this evolution of our microbiome, even healthy, from young ages to older ages. So we just have to be very considerate and very aware and cognizant of the benefits and what we're really trying to achieve. What is the outcome? That's kind of the fun part of the fecal transplants. Although, just to be clear, the idea of modifying our microbiome goes all the way back to the 4th century BC when the ancient Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, they were using something called yellow soup because they saw the benefits to our health by trying to alter an unhealthy microbiome or an unhealthy gut at the time. Of course, they didn't know about the microbiome. Alter it into a much healthier place. And how they do that is by exposing these people who are struggling with a GI issue to a brand new, much more healthy microbiome. And in their case, they could only achieve that through feces, transplanting feces, either orally or through the rectum. So this is a really, I know it's somewhat of a grotesque topic. It certainly isn't topic you talk about at dinner or a dinner party, but it is an important idea to keep in mind how incredibly powerful the microbiome is through all these different techniques, whether they be through the oral route, our diet, our access to probiotics, prebiotics, a lot of the environmental organisms, SBOs, and where in certain cases you're going to see fecal transplants continually be used in very specific clinical conditions. But that outside of doing this really invasive procedure, putting your microbiome first, making sure that you're always cognizant of your health of the gut, health of the bugs in your gut and so on, even the oral microbiome on down, that's going to deliver you the most health. So clearly that's another example of the importance of our microbiota. Thanks for joining, and click below to get more information and follow us along. Appreciate it.